A nuclear explosion is a nuclear explosion, but the means of delivery is another matter. Does the actual delivery technology matter that much given the devastating effects? And what of the accompanying doctrine? So join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
Over the ages, mankind has excelled not only in works of art and culture, but has also proven outstandingly innovative when inflicting pain and devastation upon itself. When the little boy nuclear bomb was dropped on the Japanese city of Hiroshima in 1945, unleashing an inferno of 15 kilotons of TNT, many thought it was the end of all warfare and a harbinger of the United States' unchallenged world supremacy. Neither premise proved true. The arms race continued, with powers vying for global hegemony, stockpiling nuclear warheads, and stepping up the development of nuclear-capable submarines. This brought the world to the brink of nuclear extinction on October 27, 1962, when at the height of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Soviet patrol submarine B-59 almost launched a nuclear torpedo while under pressure by American destroyers. Based on Nazi prototype intercontinental ballistic missiles, this type of weaponry was soon noticed by Americans and developed by Nazi scientists, transferred to the US as part of Operation Paperclip. ICBMs outclassed bomber-dropped nuclear bombs in terms of speed, precision, and reliability, enticing a number of other states to produce their own. The latest hypersonic novelty of this armaments showcase is Russia's Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missile, boasting 6 warheads, each reportedly containing submunitions. As reported by the Ukrainian military, Oreshnik, moving at a hypersonic speed exceeding 3.4 kilometers per second, travels through the upper atmosphere, which renders its interception exceptionally difficult. The first confirmed operational use of Oreshnik took place on November 21, 2024, during a Russian attack on Ukraine's PA Pivdenmash facility in Dnipro. Last Thursday, Russian leader Vladimir Putin claimed that the missile's mass production had started. Under Russia's nuclear doctrine overhauled at Putin's behest in November, a sizable attack on Russia or Belarus with conventional missiles, aircraft or drones, but also any critical threat to Russia's sovereignty could make the Kremlin consider a nuclear response. With Oreshnik's alleged range of 5,800 kilometers, Moscow may now be capable of hitting not just Ukrainian command centers, but also other targets across Europe, reaching as far as the UK.
I'm delighted to welcome once again Artur Kacprzyk. He's an international security analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, based here in Warsaw. Welcome once more to the program. Great to have you.
Thanks for having me again.
Yes, you're a welcome guest. We're going to talk about this Oreshnik intermediate-range ballistic missile. So let's go down to the basics. What is it? How was it used? What is it designed to do, and was it used in the recent strike on Ukraine? Was it used in the way that it was designed to be used? So,
I'll start with the last question because there's a lot of things to unpack here. So first of all, it was used for political purposes. Obviously, it was targeted at a particular Ukrainian facility which produces arms. It used to produce missiles in the Soviet times, probably produces missiles today. So there might have been some kind of operational, tactical objective on the Russian side. But the biggest one was political. Basically, this strike was supposed to show that Russia is somehow reacting to US and Western allies crossing something that Putin termed as a red line, which is authorizing Ukrainian strikes with Western weapons on Russian territory, because this Oreshnik strike happened a couple of days after this decision was leaked to the press, and some strikes with missiles like ATACMS, American short-range ballistic missiles, happened. So I think the idea here was to dominate the headlines, basically, to show that Russia is doing something new, but at the same time not do something which Putin actually said in September he might do if this authorization for missile strikes is given by the West to Ukraine. Because at that time he said that if this happens, it would mean that NATO countries will be at war with Russia. And as we see, Russia did not retaliate against the West because despite all that rhetoric, it would be risky and escalation can work both ways. Yes.
You mentioned an interesting point about the warheads used on this missile, that they were inert or training warheads.
Well, we don't know. So first of all, intermediate range ballistic missile is a missile which travels to the distance of up to 5,500 kilometers.
So cover is designed to hit Europe.
It's designed to regional strikes. That's how I would put it, right? It could be also used against some targets in Asia, but with this kind of range, and we don't know the exact range of Oreshnik. It traveled some 800 kilometers during that particular strike on Ukraine, which is definitely not the the maximum range of it. But the Russians said it's an intermediate range ballistic missiles. The Americans confirmed this. This is a missile, a ballistic one. It travels into space, then it falls down to the Earth. So it's fast. It's difficult to intercept.
Because of its speed?
Because of its speed.
Profile? Because
of its speed. Now, as I said, we don't know many things about this weapon. We don't know if it's really as maneuverable as Putin claims it is, because maneuverability is another factor which makes it more difficult to intercept it. Then again, it seemed that it carried 6 warheads, and there had some kind of submunitions. But then again, we didn't really see any kind of... We did see some damage on that facility after the strike, but we didn't see any big damage, big explosions. We didn't see any, I would also add, particular precision in that strike. So what I'm trying to say is that to caution that this weapon is not necessarily as revolutionary as Putin claims.
So it could have been using it just as a test bed to
as a kind of a
systems.
Political signal and as a test. So maybe the warheads could have been empty, right? Now, what the Russians claim is that they can carry both conventional and nuclear warheads. And now let me just say one thing. Russia has plenty of nuclear weapons to attack Europe, NATO. Also NATO countries, United States especially, yes, but also UK and France, they also have plenty of nuclear weapons to strike back at Russia. And there is no, with Oreshnik or not, there is no credible defense against massive nuclear strike on large scale with hundreds of rockets being used. Now, there are of course reasons why, in addition to using it as a psychological weapon, Russia might see this IRBM, this Oreshnik, as useful. For example, if Russia gets to field it in large numbers, and it doesn't seem to be the case, as we discussed, it seems to be at a relatively early stage of maybe not development, but functioning in the service of Russian armed forces. Well, Russians can, for example, retarget some of their intercontinental range ballistic missiles, which are longer and which are even more difficult to intercept than IRBMs. They can redirect more of them from European targets to US targets. But again, this is not a strategic kind of change. Militarily, where it might change something is actually not the nuclear dimension, but the conventional one. And I'm sorry for getting into some kind of technical military, maybe boring things for some people. But if you look at the conventional level, Russian options for long-range strikes on Europe are smaller than actually the nuclear ones. Because with nuclear, they can fire shorter range weapons, if you talk about Western Europe, from ships, from submarines, from some aircraft, or, as I said, they can use these really, really long-range intercontinental range ballistic missiles. But the latter ones, intercontinental range ballistic missiles, they don't carry conventional payloads in Russian service. They are first of all very expensive, but yes, they are also not precise enough. So with this, Oreshnik, if they produce it in large numbers, yeah, they might get some additional option to conduct strikes on Western Europe conventionally with a missile which is difficult to intercept. But again, I don't see any any signs that impossible to intercept. Because we've been working, I mean the West, especially the United States, for years has been working on systems to intercept these intermediate range ballistic missiles. Actually, the Russian ones, here I would open another probably angle of discussion, because there was such a thing as INF Treaty, which banned both Russia and United States for having these intermediate range missiles for a long time, and Russia violated it. Then US left it some 5 years ago, and it's not functioning anymore. But the US was working on systems to counter especially North Korean or Iranian medium and intermediate range missiles, now Chinese as well. So there are systems like the ones that are being put right now in the Aegis Ashore missile defense site in Poland, Redzikowo, right? Which can do that. But this is expensive. You need large numbers of this. So in NATO, we are not yet in a place where we have enough of these interceptors to defend from a large type of attack conducted with these IRBMs. But at the same time, I also don't think that the Russians have a large number of these IRBMs either.
Does this mean that all the treaties that we knew when I was younger, all these arms limitation treaties, nuclear arms limitation treaties, that's just gone out of the window? We were into a new arms race with one weapon system producing a counter, producing another weapon system. Is that the way? Is that the world we're living in now?
We are living definitely in a world where there is an increased demand for missiles, including those intermediate range missiles. Not necessarily in response to one country fielding them. So, for example, obviously the Russians are working on intermediate range things. They also had some kind of intermediate range cruise missile, which is slower, flies lower, and that was, they denied it, of course, but the fact that they developed it was the reason why the US left the INF Treaty. But US also wanted to have its own intermediate range missiles, which can be stationed on the ground and not just launched like some cruise missiles from the air or from ships, to better counter China, which has the biggest arsenal of such missiles in the world. By the way, dual capable. The US and the European states are now working on, when it comes to these ground-launched intermediate range missiles, only on conventional ones. So even without Oreshnik, for example, there would be reasons for European countries, and there is a growing interest in that, in having intermediate range missiles, conventional ones, which can strike deeper into Russia. Why? We see why. Because of the conflict. Because Russia is big, it has military bases, military airfields from which it attacks Ukraine and from which it could attack NATO members in case of a war with NATO. It has, for example, arms industry situated deep in its own territory. So, yes, there is maybe not an arms race, but definitely nations around the world are arming themselves in missiles.
We're still limited to sea-launched, land-launched, air-launched missiles. So the delivery, the origin of delivery is still as it was years and years ago. And isn't that the weak point of these systems, where we know where they're going to? You need to, for example, task a plane to take off from an airfield to launch a cruise missile, and the enemy knows where that plane is going to take off. I mean, that's the weak point of all these systems.
I think one of the points, that's a great question, because one of the points of putting those intermediate range missiles on land, on mobile launchers, is the fact that by multiplying launchers and targets, you make it more difficult for the enemy to find them and to destroy them preemptively. Obviously, it's much more difficult to, for example, find 20 mobile launchers with missiles, driving somewhere around in the forests, deep into enemy's territory, than to strike a single airbase where you may have more than 20 aircraft, for example. So it's partially about making the whole force structure more resilient, more protected from an attack. With these basing modes, it's also the fact that when it comes to this particular class of missiles, intermediate range ones, well, it's easier to basically put bigger missiles like ballistic missiles on land, which have their own advantages in terms of speed. So, for example, from NATO perspective, also having some ballistic conventionally armed missiles would add very much to this cruise missiles like Tomahawk, right, which we know very well from various conflicts, would make it the NATO posture and ability to strike back at Russia if Russia attacks NATO conventionally more effective.
How does the latest strike by Oreshnik tie in with yet another change in Russian nuclear doctrine? It just seems to be President Putin lowered the threshold to be able to strike back with nuclear weapons to any power that's nuclear armed power that supported Ukraine, a non-nuclear armed power. Is there any difference in what he's said years and years ago?
Not really. I mean, it's just another attempt to intimidate the West, to discourage the West from providing support to Ukraine. When it comes to publishing the doctrine, it happened, I think, one day before the Oreshnik and a day or two after this ATACMS strike by Ukraine on military targets in Russia. Again, most of the changes which are there, including the one you put there, they have been already previewed by Putin in September. So probably they had the document ready for quite some time. They were just waiting for the right moment to put it out there to basically show, as I said at the beginning of our conversation, that, oh, we are somehow escalating or doing something. But again, without causing real escalation with NATO. And I think it's important to add that these are declared thresholds when Russia might use nuclear weapons. It's always about the calculations of the decision maker, in this case, President of Russia, Putin. That person makes the decision, weighing pros and cons of whether to use nuclear weapons. So the fact that something is in the doctrine is that because they want to send us a signal, doesn't necessarily think something might happen. Besides, even in this doctrine, which lowers the declared threshold and specifies more situations in which Russia could use nuclear weapons, it's still ambiguous. It still leaves lots of room for interpretation and gives Russia freedom of maneuver in making this decision.
Just reinforces the point that you've been saying all along, is that it's a psychological game as well as a contest of just pure will.
I think I was reading the other day comments to one of our conversations, and I think one of the viewers said that all this deterrence is all mind games. Well, maybe not all, as we talked. There is a military side of this, but in large part it is mind games, and Russia is still playing mind games with the West. But right now, Ukraine is striking perfectly legitimate military targets in some part of Russia, border parts of Russia. So it would be unreasonable for Russia to take the risk of escalating with nuclear weapons or strike against NATO in response to that. In addition, obviously, we will have a new president, US president, coming in soon, with which Russia hopes to try to hammer out some agreement and get some concessions. Whether they will get this is another question. But what I'm trying to say is that at this point, despite the Oreshnik, despite doctrine changes, I don't see an increased dangers of Russia using nuclear weapons. That being said, of course, let's just not play it down totally, right? Russia has nuclear weapons, is aggressive, which is why NATO needs to maintain effective deterrence and help Ukraine win, to show Russia that, well, nuclear intimidation doesn't work.
Yes, Putin and Trump trying to get into each other's minds. Thank you very much, Artur Kacprzyk, for coming on to the programme once more.
Thank you so much.
That's it. Join us next time for How We Got Here.